What's up, everybody? Welcome to Around the NHL. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about the best player on every NHL team in the 2018-2019 season. Now, I did this last year for the best player on every team for last season. It actually did really good, so I wanted to make this again and kind of update it. And I honestly didn't even go back to look at what the best players I said were last year, but it'll be interesting to compare them from last year to this year. So we're going to go every single team, alphabetical order. I'm going to briefly talk about the best player on that team, or at least who I deem to be the best player. And so we're going to start out with the Anaheim Ducks, and I believe, and I think I said this last year, I think it's Ryan Getzlaf still. Now, he's getting older. He's 33 years old, but he is still a dynamic player, still pretty fast, even though he is getting up there. Center, obviously, huge man, very skilled, one of the best passers, pure passers in the NHL. You know, he's not a pure goal scorer, but he can definitely score goals, but definitely a very good passer, gets, 70, 80 points every single year, does extremely well. Now, they have a lot of very talented players on that team. I think players will eventually become better than him when he starts to take some steps back over the next coming years, much like Carey Price kind of has done over the last several years. But until then, I still think he's the best player on that team. Then we have the Arizona Coyotes, and I think this is Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Now, you can maybe make a case for Clayton Keller, maybe Antti Raanta, possibly, but I think Oliver Ekman-Larsson is easily the best player on the team. He still puts up so many points. He's always one of the leading defensemen in terms of goal scoring. He's a very talented player. Now, yes, he, plus minus wise, he's not very good, but that's just because Arizona, over the last several, really since he's been there, besides a couple years when they made the playoffs earlier on, they have not been that good of a team, but he has always been an absolute rock back there. He's a very underrated defenseman, kind of because of the geographical location of where he's at, but I think there's no doubt that he's the most talented player on that roster. Then we have the Boston Bruins. I think it's Patrice Bergeron. Now, you could, again, and I think I said this last year, make a point for Tuukka Rask, or maybe even Brad Marchand. I think Marchand is a player that a lot of people would maybe go to, or even David Pasternak. Pasternak is extremely talented too, a very good goal scorer. But I think Bergeron, as an overall package, is the best player on that team. He's constantly in the mention for the Selke Trophy. He's a very good two-way player, fantastic on faceoffs. He can score. He puts up a ton of points while playing a ton of ice time. So he does it all for the Boston Bruins. I think overall, just the fact that he does so much for that team, I think that is why he's their best player. Then we have the Buffalo Sabres, and I think this is a very easy one. Jack Eichel is their best player. He's one of the best players, I believe, in the NHL. He's showing that very early on into the season. I think this is the year that he takes a major step up to get to like a point-a-game player or more. I think he's absolutely, Buffalo's my team, so I can talk about Eichel all day. I can talk about that roster all day. And, they're getting better as a team, and there are very talented players. Maybe Rasmus Dahlin, he can maybe make a mention for that in the future. But as of right now, it's 100% Jack Eichel. The Calgary Flames is a little bit tough because they really have two, Sean Monahan and Johnny Gaudreau. I'd say Gaudreau is their best player. I think offensively, he's their best player. Now, but again, in terms of maybe the best player on the whole roster, Sean Monahan is a very talented player. He's kind of the finisher that Gaudreau is the passer, but Gaudreau can score too. Insanely talented, both those guys. I would personally give it to Gaudreau. I think he's the most fun player to watch on the team. I think he's the most dynamic player, and in terms of, in that way, I do think he's the best player on that roster. The Carolina Hurricanes are tough because I think it's either between Jordan Staal or Justin Falk, and I'm going to give it to Justin Falk. They have a lot of young players on that roster, and so overall, I do think in the coming years, they're going to get a lot better. Justin Falk, I think, is a fantastic defenseman that I don't think they give enough credit to, considering this could possibly be his last year there. Trading Jeff Skinner in the offseason, I think he was one of their absolute best players on the roster too. So as of right now, I do think it's Justin Falk. Sebastian Aho is insanely good, a very young player coming up that has had some really good years recently, and is going to start doing, and even this year is going to do fantastic as well. And they have some really good players, but overall, I think what Justin Falk does for the team, even though Jordan Staal is also very talented, I do think Justin Falk takes this one. The Chicago Blackhawks, I think this is easy. I'm going to say Patrick Kane, because just Patrick Kane, in terms of offensive talent, is up there, and he's always been up there. He's kind of been the underrated point scorer because year after year, he's constantly at the top. He's one of the leading point scorers in the league over the past 7, 8, 9 years, added up. So I think he does it kind of under the radar because we all know that he's very good, but I don't really know if we give him as much credit as he deserves. Jonathan Toews would be a good one, and this year he's been doing insanely well to start the year, but last year he took a major step back. I just think with the kind of style he plays, I think overall he is on the decline, where Kane is still kind of in the prime of his career and still putting up a ton of points. So I would say Patrick Kane takes it from Jonathan Toews. The Colorado Avalanche, I think it's, again, a pretty easy one. Nathan McKinnon. I mean, Landeskog and Rantanen and all of them, they're super, super good. And that line, just that first line, is insane. But Nathan McKinnon, I mean, what can you say about him? He was absolutely a monster last year. I actually drafted him in my fantasy league, and I'm so happy I did. But he's a fantastic player, very dynamic, very fast, very skilled. I mean, he can do it all, and he really puts up the points. He's doing it again this year. He's one of the best scorers in the NHL. I think he proved that last year going into this year, and overall, I definitely think he's the best player on that team. The Columbus Blue Jackets, I think it's Artemi Panarin. Now, this is a tough one because this is his last year in Columbus, so I'm going to have to change this next year. Bobrovsky is a good pick, and there's a couple other players on that team. Seth Jones is a very, very good defenseman, but I think Artemi Panarin is a fantastic player, constantly puts up points. He did it last year. He was their leading point scorer. This year, he's doing it again. He's a fantastic. He's really, really good, and it's really going to hurt them if he ends up leaving their team. We'll have to see how that all goes. I don't think he's going to sign an extension. I think they'll end up having to trade him. But as of right now, for this year, for this season, for however long he's on that team, I think he's their best offensive talent. I think overall he's their best player. The Dallas Stars, this is a tough one. Jamie Benn or Tyler Seguin. I'm going to give it to Seguin. I'm going to give it to the goal scorer because Seguin just does so much with goal scoring. You really don't see many players be as good in terms of scoring goals as Tyler Seguin. He just has another dimension to him with goal scoring. Jamie Benn is super, super good. I've drafted him in my fantasy league before too. I really, really love him as a player. I think he's fantastic. Very, very big guy. Definitely he can score and he puts up assists, and Seguin can do the same. Seguin is more of that pure goal scorer. But they have a really loaded roster. I mean, you could even make the argument for Klingberg. Ben Bishop is a very good goalie, but Klingberg, I think Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin is a fantastic three that you could really argue any of those three who is the best player on the team. I'm just going to give it to Tyler Seguin. Detroit, I think it's Dylan Larkin. Now, with the retirement of Henrik Zetterberg, it kind of opens up a spot. I think Zetterberg was a fantastic player and has always been a fantastic player, but Dylan Larkin, he is really, in terms of offensive talent, they don't have that much offensive talent left, and I think Dylan Larkin is their leading guy. He was basically their leading guy last year. I think he did a fantastic job last year. They have some talent around them, but honestly, I can't personally think of any player on that team that even comes close to matching him in terms of what I can think of in offensive talent. I definitely think he's the best player. The Edmonton Oilers, I mean, this is about as easy as it comes. Connor McDavid. Leon Draisaitl is insanely good. He's a fantastic player as well, and those two make up two of the best players in the NHL, but Connor McDavid is the best player, I believe, in the entire NHL. I think he's surpassed Sidney Crosby 100%. And so, if I think he's the best player in the NHL, he's easily the best player on the team. He's so fast. He's the fastest player I've ever seen play hockey. He's the most talented player I've ever seen hockey. He just has an extra layer. I feel bad that Edmonton can't actually figure it out around these two because they really have the best offensive duo in terms of him and Draisaitl that I think they may ever have, other than Gretzky if you eliminate that in terms of now. So they really have to figure it out, but I think without a doubt he is their best player. The Florida Panthers are hard as well. I'm going to say Barkov, and I said Barkov, I believe, last year. Their captain, a player who's extremely, extremely good, very big, again, uses his size very, very well. Goal scorer, he's very good. Now, again, you can make the argument, and I think I did this last year too, Huberdeau is a phenomenal player as well, and so is Aaron Ekblad. I mean, those are two very, very good players that you could argue for as well. I'm going to say Barkov just because of the kind of two-way dynamic of him, just because of his size. I do think he's the most lethal weapon on that team, even though Huberdeau is insanely good as well. The Los Angeles Kings, I think, is still Anze Kopitar. Now, you could argue Drew Doughty, and they got Kovalchuk, which is kind of cool too. But I think Anze Kopitar is the best player on that team by a mile. I really don't think any other player. I mean, Drew Doughty does do it all, and he's always one of the top D-men in terms of time on ice. He's one of the top players for time on ice, so he's constantly being used by that team, and he's a fantastic player. I mean, he doesn't make that many mistakes. But Kopitar, again, insanely good two-way player. Last year, he put up the points. Kopitar was never really the one to put up an insane amount of points, but he has done it from time to time. Every so often, every couple of years, he puts up like just a high 70 amount of points. Sometimes he has low years. Last year was an example of a high year for him. He's getting older. The entire team, the entire core of that team is getting older, but I still think easily he's the best player on that team. The Minnesota Wild, I'm going to say Ryan Suter. Now, there's a couple of guys on that team, and there's a lot of older guys on that team that could make the argument. Zach Parise, I think, has taken a massive step back. I don't really think he's like in the running, but somebody like a Charlie Coyle or even a Nino Niederreiter, I mean, those are two fantastic players as well. I don't think they come come close to Ryan Suter. Mikko Koivu, super talented. I really, really like him as a player, but he's getting older too. And Devin Dubnyk, a goalie of the year really 2 years ago, taking a little bit of a step back over the last little while. But so I think that really does leave Suter, even though he is also getting a little bit older, the things that he can do and what they trust him with and what he's able to achieve as a defenseman who puts up, again, and just like a Drew Doughty, an insane amount of minutes. I mean, he's constantly on the ice, and he's just such a smooth skater. He's a smooth passer. He's on their penalty kill. He's on their power play. He does it all. In terms of overall player and what they expect out of players, there's no one on that team that's higher than Ryan Suter, and I think that puts him as my best player. The Montreal Canadiens, now they have traded a lot of their most best players, I think, in terms of Galchenyuk, in terms of PK Subban a couple years ago. They've traded a lot of really good players. I think this is an easy one. I think Carey Price is their best player. I think he was last year too, even though he had a down year. Look at the team. Look at the team that he had in front of him. You can only go so far as the team. I mean, a goalie can carry a team to an extent, but even like a Lundqvist can't carry a team that far. So there's really no goalie that can do that, and Carey Price is just an example of that. You know, he's a fantastic goalie. I think he's still like a top 5 goalie in the league. It's just he has a terrible team in front of him. But I think without a doubt, he's their most talented player. I really don't think they have anybody else on their roster that even comes close. And if they did, again, like a Galchenyuk, they just trade them all away. So, and Pacioretty, they trade them all away. So there's really nobody that can come close to him. And if somebody does come close to being as good as Carey Price, they're most likely going to get traded. The Nashville Predators, I think, are insanely tough. I don't think you can give it to a goalie. I don't think you can give it to Rinne. I think it comes down between someone like a PK Subban or one of their forwards like an Arvidsson or Ryan Johansson. I'm going to give it to PK Subban just because of not just the personality of him, but what he does for that team. Still puts up an insane amount of points as a defenseman. It really just overall, you can always count on him. He's still very, very dynamic. He, again, puts up a lot of points, puts up a lot of goals. He's always, again, one of the leading goal scorers in terms of defensemen. He's on the ice a lot, but it's tough. I mean, this team has a lot of very, very talented players in defense. I mean, their defense is loaded just in general. Their forwards are loaded just in general. So really, you can take your pick at one of them. It's another one of those examples where, you know, you can kind of just pick which one you want because there's a couple people that you could definitely make an argument for, and I would just give it to PK Subban. The New Jersey Devils, I think, are pretty easy. Taylor Hall. Taylor Hall was their best player last year. Taylor Hall was probably a top 5 player in the league last year. I don't think that changes. I mean, Nico Hischier is super, super good. I've always been a Corey Schneider fan. I don't think, I think he's taken some steps back. They got a solid defense. They have solid offensive players, but I don't really think anybody comes close to being as good as Taylor Hall on that team. I think he's easily the best player. The New York Islanders, this is very, very tough just because they traded John Tavares, and Tavares was their best player last year. So I'm going to give it to Matthew Barzal. He's a fantastic player. Last year, he was a fantastic player. Put up an insane amount of points. In terms of what he did, didn't he get like a 5-goal game at some point last year? What he did last year was insane at such a young age, and even watching the team play this year, it's still obvious that, yes, they lost Tavares, but like Anders Lee, Josh Bailey, they're still super, super good. And then Matthew Barzal is insanely talented. Just everything he does on the ice, he's like a Johnny Gaudreau. Like, I see a lot of the same elements of those two. Very, very slippery, very, very fast. Smaller player, but insanely, insanely talented. The New York Rangers, I think this is Henrik Lundqvist. I don't really think there's anybody else in that team that even comes close. He is still the king. He's still a fantastic goalie. Yes, the team in front of him is collapsing and going into a rebuild. He still wants to stay there. Good on him. He's easily still one of the best goalies in the NHL, even though he's another year older. He's getting up there in age, but he's a fantastic goalie, still one of the best, and easily the best player on that team. And the Ottawa Senators are next, and Ottawa is kind of easy. I think it's going to be Matt Duchene. That's who I would give it to. Now, they have Stone. They have a couple players, but really, it's really only Duchene and Stone, because everybody else they just trade away. Carlsson and a load of forwards, load of defensemen. They really have nobody left on that team. Craig Anderson's a really good goalie. I've always thought he's been a good goalie, and he's continued to stay pretty consistent. He's not an elite goalie, but he's not a bad goalie either. But I think Matt Duchene is a fantastic player, super talented offensively. Really, he's super good. I would want him on any team. I think he slots in as a top 6 forward on absolutely any team in the NHL. And when it comes to Ottawa, it's really easy to say he's the best player because I don't think there's anybody that's even close to that. Philly, I think, is Claude Roux still. Now, Voracek, you could easily make an argument for, and Gostisbehere, you can definitely make an argument for as well, because what those two do on the ice is insanely good as well. But I think it all still revolves around Drew. I think in terms of what he does for the team, he's the captain, obviously, but he his points speak for themselves. Voracek's points speak for themselves too. But I think when you're just thinking of a player, if you had to choose between the two, I think people would go. I think it's maybe just even position. I think people would go after the center. I think people would go after Claude Roux. And so I do believe he's the best player. Pittsburgh Penguins, Sidney Crosby. There's not much you could argue here. He is still one of the best players in the league. While I do think Connor McDavid is better, I think Sidney Crosby is still top 3, top 4 players in the NHL. Malkin, obviously, insanely good. Matt Murray, very talented goalie. They've got, Hornquist, Kessel. You list them off. Hagelin. They have so many forwards. But Sidney Crosby, obviously, we know about him. We know he's one of the best players. We know he's been the best player in the NHL for years and years and years. And he's always going to be one of the best players in the NHL as long as he's still playing. So I think it's pretty easy to say that's him. And the St. Louis Blues, I think, is Vladimir Tarasenko. I think I said this last year as well. You really don't see goal scorers like that very often. There's a couple of them, and there's getting more in the NHL nowadays. I think teams are starting to just find these players that are insanely good scorers, and Tarasenko is one of them. Yes, they trade for Ryan O'Reilly. He's a very good player. Pietrangelo is a fantastic player. Alex Steen. They've got a lot of talent on that team, but Tarasenko, in terms of pure goal scorer, there's really only a couple players better than him in the NHL, and so I think it's really easy to say he's the best player on that team. The San Jose Sharks. This one is pretty tough. I'm going to go Erik Carlsson because I do think Carlsson is the best defenseman in the NHL. I'm saying that. I do think he's better than Brent Burns. Now, Brent Burns, you could argue he's the best player on that team. Evander Kane is insanely good. Joe Pavelski, Logan Couture. They have so many players. Martin Jones, I think, is one of the best goalies in the NHL as well. But when I think it comes down to it, you have to look at the best player. I think Erik Carlsson is the best defenseman in the NHL. The things he can do with the puck are insane. The amount of points he can put up are insane. The amount of time he's on the ice is insane. I really enjoy watching him as a player. I do think he's the best player on that team. The Tampa Bay Lightning, Nikita Kucherov. I think this one is an easy one too. Steven Stamkos, Victor Hedman. There's so many. Tyler Johnson. There's a lot of players on this team. But again, I think it's pretty darn easy. I think Kucherov, over the past couple years, has come out of relatively nowhere. I don't really think people expected him to be like one of the best players the NHL has seen, and he just puts up points just year after year, puts up in the high 80s, low 90 point scale, and just does it consistently with ease. And then that team is just an insanely talented team. And overall, he's easily the best player, I think. I think there are some people that you could argue for, but in my opinion, I think Kucherov is the best. Toronto, you could definitely make an argument for either or, but it's either Matthews or Tavares, in my opinion. I'm going to say Matthews. I think Matthews overall is a better player than John Tavares. And even when you consider age, I think they're relatively close in terms of scoring. And so maybe you could argue Tavares, but when you think of age, there's like an 8-year gap between the two. I do believe that gives Matthews the upper hand. I feel like he's got a higher ceiling than Tavares has, and Tavares over the years will end up kind of dropping just because of age, and Matthews, is just going to come into the prime of his career. So I think Matthews is the best player now. I think he will be for a very, very long time. Vancouver, I think it's Bo Horvat for Vancouver. Now, obviously, both the Sedins retired, so you can't give it to one of them. They have that Elias Peterson, who is lighting up the NHL early on in the season, and he's really, really fun to watch. He's not really a player that I was watching very much, but in terms of like the highlights, what I've seen from him on Vancouver he could very well be one of their best players going, in the future. But I think Bo Horvat, I've always liked him. I liked him last year a lot. I think he was a very good complementary piece to the Sedins, and I think right now he's their best player. I don't really think they have, I like Tanev as a defenseman, but they really don't have any defenseman that can rival them, and forward-wise, they really they have some younger players coming in. But overall, I think Bo Horvat is their best piece. Then we have the Washington Capitals. Easy, Alex Ovechkin. I don't think there's another player on that team. Alex Ovechkin is one of the best goal scorers I think the league has ever seen, ever. I think he could be top 3 goal scorers the league has ever seen. You don't really put up goals like Ovechkin in the modern age like this. The NHL has gone for let's stop goals from happening over the past decade. And that is when he's come into the league, and that's when he's absolutely dominated in terms of goal scoring and scored an unbelievable pace. So, the history speaks for itself, and yes, although he's getting much older, he can still do it, and I assume he's always going to put up 40-plus goals a year, so I really don't think there's anything to worry about. I think he's easily their best player. And Winnipeg is kind of tough. I'm going to give it to Patrik Laine, based again on the goal-scoring aspect. I think he's a fantastic goal scorer who is going to get into very closely over. I really have a lot of high hopes for Laine. I think he'll be just in the tier below an Ovechkin. I really do think Laine is a very talented goal scorer, before and always will be. But you can make an argument. I mean, their defense is loaded. You got players like Byfuglien. I love Mark Scheifele. I really, really respect him as a player. I think he's a fantastic center, easily one of the best centers in the league, even though he's not really talked about as that. Constantly gets in the high 70s, low 80s points, and he's still relatively young. And so you could definitely make an argument for Scheifele. I think it really does come between Scheifele and Lyon, but I'm giving it to Lyon just because of the goal-scoring ability of him. So that's what I think, guys. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think about who I picked? Who's the best player in every NHL team, in your opinion? Let me know. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, podcast. Now, I tend to do these every so often, so maybe at some point throughout the regular season this year, I'll have another video. We'll probably predict the playoffs at the end of this season, so make sure you check back for that. And thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you on the next episode of Around the NHL.